All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit, give some of the ideas I discussed at the bris yesterday, although with a little bit of a different take on the issues. One of the things these could really be like like Rabbi Fishbane told me afterwards. He said my 20-minute drasha there at the bris really could have been 5 drashas. I know the Boston Rav, J.B. Soloveitchik, he was famous. He had the 5 drashas, which incidentally, contain both pro-Zionist and anti-Zionist teachings. People should be aware of it. There's not this. Everyone wants to pigeonhole everyone into groups and the beauty of the individual is what's really important, really, in my mind. And I think this is something I really want to bring out in what I'm teaching today, aside from what I said at the bris. And I really think it's really worthwhile to separate this into several different videos and not have just one video. In any event, I'm reflecting on this really. There's another video that I made, and there was something else that someone was upset at me about on a Twitter post. And they said that my hate is deplorable. And I know that being called deplorable is somewhat of a badge of honor in some of our circles, and that's kind of passé. That's so 2016, but it's hard to believe it's already 2018. How fast time flies. But people want to see everything in black and white. They don't want to see things in terms of their nuance of how the world is. And so everyone wants to pigeonhole people into groups in order to divide and conquer, except the only people who don't want to do that are essentially what I would call the American libertarian right, which is different than the European right and different than really most of the left today, although in a certain sense, the old American left shares much more in common with the modern American right. And there are many, normal mainstream Democrats who probably are still in this category, but the problem is people try to oversimplify everything. That's really the issue that we have to contend with, is the oversimplification of the world. I would pick up a hitchhiker, but I can't right now. I'm late for work. My wife says, don't pick up hitchhikers, they could kill you. I was like, all right. I don't know why this car yesterday, it was really moving quite fast, and now here comes Uncle Joe. He's moving kind of slow at the junction. So, let's get back to what we were talking about. And I made a video on this subject before, but I want to really kind of reflect on a teaching that I taught at the bris. I mentioned at the bris who the baby's named after. One of them was Moshe Ari of Krula. Moshe Ari Ostreicher, one of my ancestors, was the chief rabbi of Krula in Hungary, and how the Berditchever Rav came to visit him. And I've told this story many times in other videos, and this is not the place. And that being mentioned, I wanted to bring out something that the Berditchever Rav, of the Heilige Berditchever Rav, Schus Yigalim Kol Yisrael Omein, Kedushas Levi, taught about Bris Milah. Isha Kisazria we had 2 weeks ago. In the Torah, it says a woman when she bears seed and gives birth to a male, that you should circumcise the flesh of his foreskin on the 8th day. And the Berditchever reflects upon the significance of these words, and I wanted to kind of get into these issues a little bit more in depth. But essentially, I'm not going to go through the whole of our Torah. Maybe we'll make another video where we're actually learning this Torah inside, because it's important to learn it. But the general idea is a question that we have to focus on all throughout what life is all about, what religion is all about. I mentioned at the bris that someone who I had the great honor to make acquaintance with, Rabbi Ariel Bar Tzadok, koshertorah.com, he has as almost his motto on his website that religion is more about man than it is about God, and that's the way God wants it. It's interesting, at my new job, I work together with an Eastern Orthodox Christian priest who says something similar. He says that essentially, the founder of his faith didn't come to start a new religion, but rather to restore humanity to its true essence of humanity. And I don't have to get into the issues of what that means in the particular sense of his theology and the getting into the fighting between our different religions. That's not the point. The point is that we have this shared concept of the restoration of humanity, even if we have different views on how it should be accomplished. And it's not an us versus them issue the way so many people would like to paint it. But essentially, the main issue that I want to bring out here is that certainly in the views of Judaism, is that people often say Judaism is a religion of action and deed, and Christianity is a religion of faith, but both religions have both deed and faith. Even the most solo faith alone approach to Christianity still recognizes the responsibility of the human being to engage in religious devotions and to avoid sin. It just says that has, the only issue that the Christian would say, that the Protestant Christian would say, the one who focuses so much on the faith alone theology would say, is that has nothing to do with his salvation. That he's not saved by his deeds. He's saved only by his faith. In Judaism, we don't have this concept of salvation in the same sense, the way that it plays out in Christianity. It's not to say that the word doesn't exist. Obviously, salvation is a word that we have in Judaism, and it's something that's very fundamental, but not as fundamental as it is to Christianity. But again, I'm really getting off subject. But all of this but I've always been one to say that Judaism is a religion of faith. I argue Perek Chelek, when it says it says every Jew has a place in the world to come, but except for those who fall into certain categories, and for the most part, those categories, with a few exceptions, generally are issues of faith and doctrine. The question is, how do we know what someone's faith is? And the answer is Dvarim Shebelev in Dvarim. We have to just basically go by whatever a person states his beliefs to be, And although I would, venture to say even someone who, I've had, people in my community who claim to be atheists. And I was watching this morning Penn Jillette, who I'm convinced is an atheist. There's certain people I'm not convinced that they're atheists. Penn Jillette, I'm convinced he's an atheist, but I could still like him even if I disagree with him. And so too, he believes that all religions are wrong, but he doesn't hate the people. He brought up some very good points in this video that I was watching today. But he was talking about, someone from a particular religious background who is authentically fearful of his life because of his stated atheism, and whereas in our community, although there is abuse, and I know people have suffered from abuse because of their stated atheism. Quite often, many people who claim to be atheists claim so more out of reaction, as opposed to someone like Penn Jillette, who I believe may have been raised atheist. I don't know. Or certainly he was raised. No, I don't think he was raised atheist. I think he was raised Christian, but certainly he was raised libertarian. But I kind of want to get away from this, although it's totally connected to the point that I want to bring out. And how so many things that we do in life as human beings are reactionary. This question of nature versus nurture is really the question that I want to bring up here, but I wanted to reflect before this on this main question of what is our purpose in life? Why are we here in this world? And the lesson that the mitzvah of Bris Milah brings out and it's a very deep theological question, and it really reflects back on so much of what, even though I'm Jewish and very strongly Jewish, but I think it can give reflection to Christians as well and to their own faith, and find some certain common ground, even though we disagree, obviously, on so many other things. And again, there's so much obsession with certain issues that you take one thing. I've worked with the mentally ill for years, and again, this same priest who I'm working with now, he said to me, several times, he said that, and this was, I think, what he told me the first day we met, is that there tends to be religious obsession with the mentally ill. People tend to be religiously preoccupied, but the more that they go away from that, the more mentally healthy they are, and the more spiritually healthy they are. And I remember seeing this, people, many of my patients have an obsession with circumcision. And, certainly certain people from the Christian backgrounds, they will, based on, Paul's letter to the Galatians and other parts of the other epistles of Paul, and then Acts 15 and other places, they'll obsess over what does this mean, and what they don't realize is that he was talking in the context of covenantal circumcision and not physical, even though it is a physical circumcision, but not one that's merely done for medical purposes or for cosmetic purposes or for cultural purposes, but rather one that's done the way we do for covenantal purposes. By us, it's the sign of the covenant is circumcision. whether one is born Jewish, and then it's in that sense, or whether one converts to Judaism, and in that sense, even to the point where, even though it's not so simple according to Chazal, but the way that we currently practice today is that if someone is already circumcised, we take Hatafas Dam Bris, we draw a little bit of blood to demonstrate that this is done for the sake of the covenant. It's a covenantal action and not merely one that's, even though it would seem from Maimonides that it's not necessary, it would seem from other Rishonim and Achronim it might not even be effective. It's a machlokas, but our practice has developed to the point where that's basically what we do, and these days it certainly makes things a lot more simple because of the fact that, when someone wants to convert to Judaism, that so many people in America are already circumcised. That the vast majority of American males are circumcised. But we're going to put that's not the point that I'm bringing out here. The real point that I want to bring out also makes it difficult for hippies and for Europeans and other countries who want to convert. But let's put that aside for now. The idea of circumcision as a mitzvah. And again, I'm not going to go inside to all of the Kabbalistic terminology and other ideas that the Kedushas Levi brings out. But essentially, the point that he brings out, and it's really from Chazal, it's really from Medrash, where he brings it from, is that the question is, what does God prefer? Nature? Nurture? And the idea is that God created us essentially imperfect. Not that his creation is imperfect, his creation is perfect, but he created us in an imperfect state in order that we can partner with him in attaining perfection. So it's similar to the Christian idea of the fall of man, and that we're in a fallen state, that we need salvation. And so therefore, it does perhaps indicate that in Judaism there is a concept of salvation by works, which is still affected essentially by grace, because it's all by the grace of God that we are able to perform these works, as opposed to the Christian ideology that it's faith alone. The Jewish ideology is that we demonstrate, and really this is the original ideology of Christianity, and that's why this is the ideology of most of the older churches, Catholic Church and so forth, and the Eastern Orthodox churches, is that one is not saved by faith alone. But rather one, that one demonstrates one's faith. Like it says in James, faith without works is dead. Someone can't go around and be totally antisocial and be a murderer and a thief and everything and say, well, I'm saved by my faith. Well, no. Where are the fruits of your faith? It's one thing to say, all right, I struggle with some kind of a sin that that doesn't really hurt other people in the physical sense, and we can discuss the spiritual sense, and we can discuss the issues there, and that can be a theological discussion. But to say, no, I can do whatever I want and I'm saved by my faith, no, that's not really so. And we have to try to seek restitution, forgiveness, and so forth when we correction when we fail, but also the failure, as Christians teach, also I think it's a Jewish concept as well. I think the difference is that, as my friend Rabbi Asher Meza always says, is that Christians believe that there's this expectation that man should never sin, whereas Judaism has an expectation that man should sin, Not that he's supposed to sin. He's not supposed to sin. It's a sin. It's wrong to sin, but that man will sin, which is biblical. The Bible says that that sin sits at the door, crouches at the door in Genesis. It's an expectation that even though a man should not sin, he will sin, and that he has to find a way to make himself right with God, and God had always provided a way for that. It's not that there was something new, that some new covenant needed to be made in order to save man from sin, but rather the way that it was always done is still being done today, and it's not necessarily through blood sacrifice. It just, but let's put that aside for now, because that's not really the issue that I want to bring out. But rather that essentially man is not naturally good or perfect. Woman maybe is, but man isn't. And there is a certain aspect of theology to that as well. Obviously, that only a man is circumcised. Although you do still need a man to make a woman, you still need a woman to make a man, and you need a woman to make a woman and a man to make a man. But the point that I want to bring out is that we are not created perfect. God created us with an imperfection. The foreskin is an emblem of that, and that God wants us to overcome our imperfections and partner with Him it's by His grace to become perfected, to become what we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to be. Through our own works that God gives us by His grace the power to perform, or at the very least the illusion of the power to perform. That's another theological issue. We could get into the Ishbitzer theology of predestination, which is radically different than, let's say, the Calvinist idea of predestination. Very different approach, even though there's obvious similarities in the theology. And I 100% do not believe that the Ishbitzer had any influence from Calvin, as much as some people might. I never heard anyone claim that, but I wouldn't be surprised the same way how people go and claim that Schlissel Challah came from some kind of a practice that was done in Ireland or something. Where would it come from? From Ireland or from Mexico or something to Poland or Hungary or somewhere else? It doesn't even make sense, and it's just as specious and ridiculous to say that as it is to say that the Ishbitzer was influenced by Calvin, and that or even by Calvin and Hobbes. Obviously, Calvin and Hobbes is post-dates Ishbitzer, and although maybe the Radziner today, I don't know, maybe he does. Maybe he did read Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know. It's a whole canon already since Bill Watterson dropped out of the limelight and became a total recluse. Let's move to some. So essentially, what I want to bring out here is this. People will point out, look, in the animal kingdom there are instances of certain things that people say is unnatural, and they're natural. And so my argument is, and this was an email that I got this morning actually along these lines by a frum psychologist. Again, the obsession with sexuality. And I think this is what this is really what I want to bring out, and the message of the Bris Milah is to teach us that our nature is something we have to overcome, even if it's difficult, even if we don't always do it, and we can fail. We can fail a million times, but keep trying. Shevi Yipol Tzadik V'Kam. Right? It says in the Proverbs that the saint, the righteous one, falls 7 times but gets back up, and that's the difference between the saint and the sinner. Is that the saint never gives up, the sinner gives up. The sinner resigns himself to say, well, this is my lot, and I have no choice but to live like this. This is my lifestyle. This is who I am. And I'm never going to get better. And why should I even try? I remember when I was a kid in public school, sitting on the bus, and someone, misunderstanding something that they probably heard in church, and they said, why should we even try to be good? Because we're all going to go to hell anyway. This type of ideology, this type of losing hope, this is the real issue. And so I brought up, there was some issue about teaching about homosexuality being a required curriculum in public schools in certain, I think in Illinois and in California and other places, that there's a curriculum to teach about the homosexual community and their history, and there's a debate as to whether or not this is proper. And I brought up, I said, this demonstrates, why we're opposed to movements like Naftali Moster from Yafed, who wants to bring the government in to the yeshivas and try to impose a certain curriculum. And the problems with that is that it's not just going to be for the Jews, it's going to be for the Christians, for the Muslims. And as I've said time and time again, this is going to lead to anti-Semitism, and it'll be justified, and that's why we have to make all of our effort to say that these people don't represent us, and we have nothing to do with them, because, and we're on your side, Christians and Muslims, against this government intrusion and violation of the very sacred, basic, fundamental right of religious freedom, which is basic to what America's all about. This is basically what this whole country was essentially based on, is religious freedom. And if people want to discuss issues of how the yeshivas are run and how they teach English in certain yeshivas, how they teach, and when I say English, I mean that in a colloquial sense, secular studies, everything's called English, and the whole secular curriculum is called English. This makes us sound kind of Amish. English. But the point, what I'm saying here is, we are essentially these things should be issues of self-government, and if the yeshivas fail, they're not too big to fail. If they fail, if all the parents pick up and take their kids out of the more Hamish schools that don't teach English and move them to other schools that do teach English, and then that's going to be, and things. This is how things operate in the free market. And people say, well, then, there's this all these other issues. People tried to open a yeshiva and they got harassed. Well, if you want to do it, so that's something you gotta. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't expect people not to harass you when you're trying something new. You don't have a right not to be harassed. when you're trying, as much as people are trying to create this right not to be harassed, you have a right not to have crimes committed against you. But is harassment really a crime? Depends on how far it goes, I guess. But putting up posters and saying that this is against that, and anyone who sends their children to this school will face certain consequences. As far as in America, you have the freedom of assembly and the freedom of association, and the freedom of association works both ways. The associations have the right to expel members who don't stand for what the association stands for, and even if they're standing for 99% of the same thing, this one issue that can cause a schism, and that's fine. That's how things work. And thank God that we're in America, where it's not a big deal for that to happen, as it was in other countries where it literally led to wars. And the fact that people had the bravery to engage, to be schismatic in Europe, where they're taking their lives into their hands, is quite an amazing thing. But in America, this is what America's all about. And the fact of the matter is, you can't go and tell me, it's absolutely 100% that there's more animosity in a place like Kiryas Joel. There's much more animosity between the Bnei Yol and the main community than there is between some question about whether to have more English or not. And people put up posters and they express their opinions all the time, and other people say, there's a Michigan, that's just, and some people making a mountain out of a molehill. But I'm getting away from the point. What I'm saying here, in the video what I posted, where I said that there was 2 points, and one was saying, we're individuals. Why do you have to point out that someone who made some great accomplishment in life was engaged in homosexuality or was bisexual, or however you want to describe that? Again, as I said in a previous video, we don't in Torah, we don't recognize this type of pigeonholing of people into these type of groups. These groups don't exist in the eyes of Torah. In the eyes of Torah, human beings are human beings, and sin is sin. And you don't get this label just because you engage in a particular sin. Now all of a sudden you are a this, you are a that. No, that's not how, especially in this field, how things work. And so I'm not saying I hate people who struggle with these issues or who don't struggle with it and who engage in it. It's not the issue. My whole point is that this identity politics, this whole idea that the most important fact about the same thing that was said in this video, the most somehow people would imagine that the most important fact about Booker T. Washington or whoever is George Washington Carver, or is that they're black. Now, it's an amazing thing that they overcame the issues that they were dealt with because of the Democrat approach to identity politics, which is exactly the same then and now. There is no difference. It's just because their actions are different doesn't mean that their ideology has changed. Their ideology has not changed. Only their method of using the ideology and the method of applying the ideology has changed. But the ideology has changed very little. Of course, things change, but essentially, this idea of identity politics remains exactly the same, and it's a vestige of the old European ideology. It's not an American ideal, the way that essentially the Republican ideology of individualism is essentially an American ideal. Let's put that aside for now. There was an article that I read this morning, I believe it was from a psychologist, on this issue of homosexuality. And what this author wrote, he says, within our community, he counsels boys, probably girls have the same issues as well, that they believe that because whether they have engaged in homosexual activity, or whether they fantasize about it, that somehow means that therefore I am gay, or I am straight, or I am bi, or I am this, or I am that. And it's the identity obsession that's the issue. And the real truth of the matter is, no, of course we're not saying to kill gay people or to discriminate against gay people. We're not saying that. Nobody's saying that that's what we're saying is that this whole idea of what I, or at least that's my feeling about it, that this whole idea of identifying people based on how they conduct themselves in their private lives, that somehow that puts you in a different category, and now the Democrats can manipulate you, take advantage of you by putting you into a group and saying, we're the only ones who are going to help you because you know, this group, they hate you, and so we have to be here to save you from these evil people who want to kill you. And that's ridiculous. That's not true. And you know, hopefully people will wake up and realize how they've been used. And this is what the Democrats do to all these groups. But there's a different point in this, is it's just not true. I mean, this author was discussing this question, and he said basically, well, people like to oversimplify everything, you know, in modern day world, you know, everything, you know, you have Kabbalah for dummies, you know, is what he pointed out. Whereas, you know, everything has to be dumbified, everything has to be for dummies. And so you know, people want to say, well, there's a gay gene, or people want to say, well, it's a choice to be gay, and you know, quite often, and then they forget about the question, well, what if maybe this person was abused, and that's what's leading this person to deal with, maybe there's other issues, or maybe it is totally natural for human beings. You know, this is my personal belief, is that the nature of the human being is to be what they would call in the modern parlance is pansexual. Like, you know, I don't know who this was, but it was someone like, it was like all over the news, so-and-so came out as pansexual. Like, what does that mean? Like, human beings, you know, naturally, you know, would engage in behavior with whatever opportunities that are presented to them, you know. And then what they talk about, this other group I never heard of, is the incel, what do they call it? The involuntary incel, the involuntary celibates, and that's a whole subculture, and there's this whole, you know, making, because, you know, one of them, you know, engaged in terrorist activity, you know, no one would go and say a particular religion, that very few of them are terrorists, but the vast majority of terrorists happen to come from that religion. No one would go and paint all of that community as you know, that would be, and it would be wrong to paint that whole community as being terrorists, because most terrorists come from a particular community doesn't mean most people from that community are terrorists or want to be terrorists or support terrorists. Most of them are scared to death of the terrorists, just as we are, and hate the terrorists just like we do. But they're, you know. But I'm going to put that aside for now. Again, everybody feels that they have to be pigeonholed into a group, and this is what I'm saying, that like what we call the extreme right, or the European right, or the alt-right, is really not the American right. It's really just a variation of the left. You know, in my estimation, what I understand the right to be in America is you know, more libertarian, more classical liberal. But the other point is that even if a person were to be born with a gay gene, which scientifically is ridiculous, it doesn't matter, because the same thing could be for anything. Whatever a person might naturally desire, our job is to try our best to overcome it. But then people, like, they just assume, you know, I mean, I had the case, I spoke about this. There was one of my patients who got killed because of this, because he was abused by other boys in high school, and he he enjoyed it, unfortunately, whatever it is, and then he got so obsessed with this, and it cost him his life, to where the point where someone was just being friendly to him. One of his friends was just simply being friendly to him, and that led to him hitting this friend of his, and then the other one, the friend, killed him. They're both mentally ill, but I'm saying this obsession, and I blame society for that. I blame the modern society for this obsession. I squarely put the blame for this man's death on how society obsesses with sexuality to the point where you are now pigeonholed into being identified with this particular group because you were born, because whatever it is, whether you're born with it, whether it's nature, nurture, whatever it is, and it's not true. It's just we have to overcome this obsession, and it's not hate. And that's my point to this person on Twitter who said, your hate is deplorable. I don't hate people. My point is that, I don't know. I can be a fan of Charles Lawton or James Whale, and it doesn't matter that they're gay, straight, this, that. Who cares? Like, why are we obsessed with this? Why does that even have to be? All right, it could be. It's a fact. It's not something that has to be ignored either. But like to create this whole curriculum of that, we have now, this whole concept of, we have this curriculum now of the, that now we have, like it's that's nonsense. That the same thing, like this other woman in this video, she said, and if you wanted to tell me, instead of looking at my accomplishments, she said, I don't want people to make this a whole curriculum about that she's white or she's a woman or she's straight or she's this or that. What rather look at what did she accomplish? Meaning it wasn't that I never even heard this Tchaikovsky or whatever that I don't really care. So what? Same thing. People discuss these questions. Vincent Price and this. And like, what difference does it make? Why are we obsessing with these issues? Why does it matter so much? Can't we just be human beings and be valued by virtue of our individual value? And what we do in the privacy of our own life shouldn't really matter that much. But no, because the Democrats don't value the individual. We see what's going on now with Bikur Cholim, with hospitals trying to kill people, the death panels that residual from Obamacare. These things we have to take care of. Whatever. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment.